Hello everybody, you're listening to the Paranormal Peep show with your hosts Andy Chaplin and Neil Geddes-Ward. Neil, how are you this fine Halloween-y type special?
I'm fine, Andy. Well, we've had a bit of an interesting month. I've been up to Halifax where I did a talk on encounters, fairy ghosts, and spirits. That kind of fits in with the Halloween theme, so it's well received up there. Lovely place to visit, Halifax, if you ever go. They're very friendly, lovely people. It's a lovely town, very very historical, and we're obviously coming into the winter months already. Only just as if we started off January really. So here we are in October already, and it's like my God, this year's gone whizzing past. Interesting, we do have a special Halloween guest tonight, which we've had talk at our Hoboken Paranormal Meetup group. So he's got some very good, interesting ghostly tales to talk about. So I don't know if you want to go ahead and introduce our special guest for this evening.
I will do after a few little notices. By the way, folks, if you can hear a cat bell on the Halloween theme, a black cat has appeared from nowhere. My little Jessie cat has just jumped up. So if you hear a cat bell, that's what that's to do
I
with.
thought it was Noddy, but carry on.
No, it's not Noddy. Yeah, I think she's after food. I'll have to feed her in a minute. But anyway, the notices are for this Halloween. I am a very busy bunny. This is literally the busiest time of year for my psychic work. So what I'd like viewers to do, if you're listening,
Listeners, yeah.
it's not on TV, are we? Listeners, if you would like to go to Tuned In Events on Facebook, that's tuned with a D, like you're tuning in a radio, but with a D, Tuned In Events. We've got quite a few different interesting nights coming up. We've got some psychic one-to-one nights where you can have a kind of like a reading with one of our special psychic team. But also, we've got a special thing in London, the King and Queen pub. Which is in central London. You'd have to kind of Google that, central London. And that one, we've got a mixture of kind of like readings, but also mini talks and workshops. We'll have somebody who does kind of ghost hunting there called David, and he also does ghost walks. So if anyone's kind of interested in that kind of thing, it will be the London area. So if you're listening in America, it probably won't apply to you, but anyone in kind of the southeast of England, go for it. So yeah, right from literally now up until Halloween time, I'm a very busy bunny. So keeping with the Halloween theme, we now come to our next guest, which is Christian Jensen Roma, who would like to be known as CJ.
So it's easier to say it, really, isn't it? You can't pronounce.
CJ's
It's so hard to say.
Christian Jensen Roma, but okay. So CJ, welcome to the show, and you're going to be talking about all kinds of hauntings and poltergeists and ghostly activity, which is perfect for Halloween, isn't it?
Well, Halloween's a great time of year, isn't it? It's funny, actually, though. I mean, it's the one time of the year when I'm not busy. So while you're doing your 15 events, I'll be sitting around and trying to find somebody's Halloween party, and nobody ever asks a ghost hunter to a Halloween party.
Gate crash it, Christian. Just go.
Well, I am tempted. I thought if I put a sheet over my head and cut a couple of eyes in it, I could go down the local uni and they'd never be any wiser. But I think I'm a bit too fat to pass as an undergraduate these days. So, yeah.
Literally, I'll just tell the listeners, literally, as you were setting up to record this, a filing cabinet inexplicably fell on your foot, didn't it?
Yeah, we had a power cut 5 minutes before that as well, just as we were starting. And it's just been a whole week of disasters, one after the other. If I believed in curses, which is an interesting one, actually. Have you ever encountered a genuine curse?
It's a very strange subject. I kind of feel that somebody's belief in a curse gives it the power. So if somebody believes in extreme bad luck, maybe they're manifesting that for themselves because they're kind of giving it the power. Whereas if you kind of cut off from it and saying, I want nothing to do with the curse, it's not going to affect me, then maybe you create that for your reality. And that gets down to a whole different kind of like rabbit hole of what is reality and how does the creation of that reality manifest. Is it something that we create, or is it something that the universe imposes on us, or is it a bit of hand in hand? What do you think?
Yeah. What, belief defines reality? Is it? I mean, that's the idea behind things like The Secret, isn't it? It's that you create your own reality and you live in your own reality tunnel that's programmed by your beliefs. And I mean, to a certain degree, I've always thought it'd be really strange if I'd grown up French rather than English and Danish. because I would not be able to use some of the concepts I do. I'd have a completely different mental apparatus because I'd use a different language.
Mm,
It's like running a computer. It's like the difference between a Mac and a PC.
yeah.
And I don't know which is superior, but being French would be really different and really cool.
And
So
Andy knows about PCs and Macs, so yeah, he
I
grows up in alternate realities all the time. I think.
I have had some problems with Skype on my Mac, but my Mac is from 2006. So at some point when I've got some money, I'll have to update it.
well, isn't that the case for all of us? I mean, the problem is that anyone who works in any kind of spiritual field, I think nowadays, even the Church of England doesn't pay half its vicars anymore, you know?
Really?
Yeah, about half of them are volunteers nowadays. They call it non-stipendiary ministers, which means they
Wow.
work for nothing.
I think they'll
But
have vicars dialing into congregations via Skype. It's going to get that bad. Are you a congregation of the Church of Skype or Mac or PC vicar? That kind of thing.
If
when real
that
everyone
happens,
networks get together.
if
Anyway, yes, curses. Going back to the curses and the Halloween theme, because
yeah,
this is going wildly off topic
it
already.
is a bit.
I've never, I hope, that I've never come across a genuine curse. There have been times in my life when I felt I was cursed.
Mm.
But when I was young, a man I knew who was much wiser than me taught me a simple defense against the curses of my enemies, which was to sing nonsense nursery side rhymes and laugh at them. And actually, laughing at a curse has never done me any harm whatsoever. So, a few times in the past, when I've said things which are controversial and people have been upset by things I say, and they've said, "Oh, I'm going to get you," I thought, "Oh well, never mind. If they try, I doubt anything will happen." But I mean, theoretically, you hear of these curdling stories of curses. And one of the things which you get with ghost stories also, which might link into this, is have you ever heard this story where two friends have been known each other for years, often when they're at school or when they're young, say, if I die first, I'll appear to you. And then years later, they haven't seen each other for decades, and then one of them dies, and the other one wakes up in the middle of the night, and their friend, who they haven't thought of for 30 years, is standing at the bottom of the bed.
Yep, I've heard of
You ever
this.
come across this?
Definitely,
Yeah.
definitely.
It's one of those cases where, and it seems to be the expression of will that they will appear that makes it happen. Yeah. And so if you can will yourself to appear as a ghost, I'm sure you could will yourself to do harm to somebody if you really wanted to. I don't know.
Is
But no,
that? I mean, is it sort of a psychological thing that if you get the people that play the victim and the martyr and things like that, and with a curse, if you feel that you're being cursed, you're being submissive, and you're actually giving them power by being submissive to their dominance, if you like.
wouldn't it be easier just to pay them to spank you? So
I do all the
I
time.
guess it's that 50 Shades thing. Well, it's definitely Tuesday, isn't
No
it?
comment on that
But
one.
yeah, but back to the point. Yeah, I mean, it could be a psychological mechanism. There could be a psychological element, but I've come across people who do seem to have incredibly bad luck. And I mean, I'm odd because I have runs of incredible bad luck and incredible good luck, but don't we all? It just all averages out in the end, I guess. Anyway, it's an irresponsible thing to talk about curses, so let's go back to something else and get on with the Halloween theme before we make people at home start to wonder if they've.
Okay.
Well, in actual fact, with the filing cabinet falling on your foot, I wasn't so much thinking curses. I was thinking more the topic of poltergeists.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay, right. No, it wasn't a poltergeist, and I can tell you why. The reason is that years and years and years ago, there were a couple of brilliant researchers in the Society for Psychical Research, Manfred Cassera, Alan Gould, who's still alive, Tony Cornell, who isn't, and Howard Wilkinson, who's still with us. And between those people, they did an awful lot of work on poltergeist cases, and they noticed certain attributes of poltergeists that occur time and time and time again. And one of them is the way poltergeist objects move. Now, the problem is that if I explain what makes poltergeist object movement unusual, then everybody will know and anyone could easily fake it. Whereas if I keep quiet, it's one of those things that's only known to a handful of people. But there does appear to be a consistency in cases, and I can assure you that when the filing cabinet fell on my foot, it definitely didn't move like a poltergeist thrown object. It moved like a clumsy oaf had just put their rubber fat arse on it. So, yeah. There are certain attributes of poltergeist which researchers know, and which I'm happy to share with you off air, or
Yeah.
indeed with anybody else who's a serious researcher. There's no secrets here but I don't really want to share it with the general public because
I,
it's the
I'll
more.
tell you what. I'll tell you what will be quite interesting, CJ. I had a very distinct, positive, almost, I suppose you could call it poltergeist incident. So, how
Yeah,
about if I describe it and then you tell
go.
me if it fits the criteria of what?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely, go for it.
Okay, so it was around about year 2002. My dad had passed away, and there was a few odd things that had happened around the house.
Yeah,
And it culminated in one particular evening where my dad used to like dolphins, and there was like a dolphin fridge magnet, which I'd noticed over a period of time kept kind of like shifting its position. So it would
yeah,
start off level, and then it would kind of like go on a tilt. And over a period of like a few weeks, I would kind of like smile to myself and kind of straighten this dolphin. And then this one particular evening, after I'd gone for a run, because I often go kind of running in the evening, this one particular evening, I had just straightened this little dolphin fridge magnet in the middle of the fridge. And then I had a bowl of rice pudding, which I was putting in the microwave. So I turned away from the fridge, and then I felt kind of like three tugs on my shirt, like one, two, three. And then I heard a click noise, like a metal noise, and I just knew it's going to be the fridge magnet. So I turn around, and sure enough, the fridge magnet had gone from the middle of the fridge to the top right of the fridge, a distance of about 8 inches, and there was no one else in the vicinity. What do you
wow.
reckon?
So it moved up across the fridge. It didn't leave the fridge, but it moved up across it.
Well, the click sound sounded like a magnet on metal. So it sounded to me
Yeah,
like it had actually been lifted off and then
and put
placed,
back.
as opposed to slid, because it wasn't a sliding noise, it was a click noise very distinctly. So it must have been taken off, but I didn't see it because I was concentrating on the microwave, which is the opposite direction. I was putting the rice pudding in, and I felt three tugs on my shirt from the behind, and then I heard the click noise and turned round, and it had moved.
I remember a case just like that actually with a fridge magnet. Only there were some letters on the fridge magnets and it spelt out mum. I think it was mum it spelt out. But they weren't in any arrangement before. Now, of course, the problem with that is that somebody could have come in and played with it, but you were alone in the room. You were the only person present, so you know absolutely that you didn't do it. So, yeah, absolutely fascinating. And yeah, that is the thing about poltergeist activity is, of course, there's two possibilities. One is that it's somehow produced by our own psychic energy. The second possibility is it's produced by spirit. And the problem is, if you allow the first, you can't really prove the second, and vice versa. You know what I mean? But to me, it could be a mixture of both. I don't know. I'm no expert. Well, I am supposedly an expert on poltergeist, but the problem with being an expert on poltergeist and people calling you that is that we know nothing. So it's really easy to be an expert on a subject when nobody knows anything very constructive.
Do you know anything
But
about tins of rice pudding?
no, go for
No,
it.
well, I just wondered if, poltergeists take an interest in tins of rice pudding as well. It's funny, Andy,
Parrots.
actually, that you had the experience when your back was turned. And that seems to be a thing with poltergeists, is that they always say they hear something move or they look, and it's just happened when they weren't looking.
Isn't that the case with nearly all phenomena? Let's give you an example. Years and years and years ago, there's a pub near Corby, and I actually forget the name. I think it's the Wellington. And at the time, the landlord and the landlady, they were been friends of mine. I'd investigated a poltergeist case at a pub they'd been at a couple of years before. And they asked me up to Corby to do a talk on ghosts of Northamptonshire for Halloween. So me and the girlfriend drove up there, did the talk. Great people, had a great night, and everybody was fairly drunk and fell asleep and went to bed. And we were up in a guest room in the back of the building, and we got into bed, turned the light off, and after a few minutes, we heard a voice crying, "Mommy, mommy!" And I said to Polly, that was my girlfriend at the time, "Oh, it's just a fox. It's got to be a fox." And then it was "Mommy," and it was turning into an infant wailing, and it sounded like it was in the room with us. And in the end, she said, "We've got to get up. There's a child in this room." And we got up and we thought there was a physical baby. Somebody had come into the room, put a baby in a cot and gone out again. So we thought we'd get up and reassure the child and go back to sleep. There was no baby in the pub as far as we knew, but we weren't thinking straight maybe. We went, we turned the light on. As we turned the light on, it was like a tape recorder stopping. As soon as we could see the whole room, nothing. So I turned the light off, went across the room, and before I got back into bed, it had started again. And we listened to it for about 5 minutes, and we were trying to work out if it was foxes outside. But then why do they stop when we turn the light on? So, not being strong enough to start moving wardrobes around in front of the window to put the light, I just said, "Oh, I'm just going to go and turn the light off again. And if it makes the foxes shut up, it makes the foxes shut up." But we went over to the window and shone a light out the window. Voice carried on, still sounded like it was in the room. Went and turned the light switch off. Sorry, on. Room flooded with light. Baby stops. And at that point, I was genuinely scared for about half a second because I thought, I've come to do a talk on ghosts. I've actually encountered something that appears to be a ghost. What do I do now? I'm a complete fraud, aren't I? You know, here I am pretending to know something about hauntings. And now I'm sitting here and I can't help. If this is a spirit and it needs moving on, I can't do anything to help it. And, you know, if it's a fox outside and it's hungry, even worse. So I just went and sat on the bed and we looked at one another and we were both absolutely convinced. But the thing for me, and the thing that I've had dozens of times, is you turn the light on or you turn your attention or something distracts you for a microsecond and the experience ends. Is that something you find, Andrew?
Yeah, totally. It's because the thing is, why did I not see the fridge magnet move? Because I know it moved because it clicked, and I saw the after effects of it moving. It moved 8 inches or so, but I didn't actually see it move physically. And you got to wonder: is there some kind of strange universal law that says that some people can't kind of like see it fully until they've reached a certain level of comprehension or like a certain level of not being freaked out by it? Because the weird thing is that there's almost like after it happened there's almost like two parts of my mind. There was one part of my mind that was like really scared and really kind of like, oh my god, this is crazy, and there was another part of my mind that was really comforted because I really felt it was my dad that did it.
Yeah,
So it was almost like there was kind of like a duet, a fighting in my mind of, oh my god, this is an actual incontrovertible haunting poltergeist type activity. Like with psychics and mediumship, because as I was growing up and doing my mediumship, I was in development circle, and with mediumship, you can only go with it to a certain extent when it's kind of talking and it's verbal and it's kind of interacting with people on a verbal nature. When it goes to an actual physical level, when you get stuff actually moving and happening kind of like in your vicinity, that's a whole different dimension. You cannot go back to thinking in any possible way how you were before that moment. It's sort of a life changer type experience, if you see what I mean.
absolutely. It was Aleister Crowley, the famous ritual magician, who said there was a great what's the actual quote? It was something like, "There's a great joy or a great satisfaction in being punched by an invisible demon whose existence 8 minutes ago one had doubted."
That's a
And
slap in the chops, yeah, for
yeah,
reality. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I was thinking this the other night. I think it's why we find poltergeists so utterly fascinating because any ghost or haunting could just be a hallucination, or somebody could have made it up, or it could be a trick of the light, or it could be imagination, or, you know, there's a million and one ways you can skeptically explain it. But when things begin to physically move around in your environment, I mean, let's give you a quick example. I would say that in almost all cases that I've ever read about, nobody directly observes the beginning of flight of the object. So if the object moves, nobody sees it start to move. They sometimes see it come to rest. I was in a house down near Cirencester, and it was a complicated case, but we'd been called in by a family who were in immense distress. And actually, they phoned us up and said, you know, "Oh, it's awful. Our children have gone to stay with their grandparents. The dog's sick. It howls all the time. We can't stay in the house. We're not staying here tonight. Oh, can you help us?" And my friend who answered the phone, yes, yes, we've got one, because he was so excited to have a case. So we went down there and kind of apologized and spent 2 weeks in their house pretty much trying to work out what was going on. And of course, we were young and naive, and we drew maps and we interviewed everybody. And but while we were upstairs in the corridor one night, I saw something flash across the corridor. And if you imagine a long corridor with doors on either side, and an object flies across at about eye level from one door, open door into another room, and it hit the ground with a noise like a cannonball. So I ran into the room expecting to find something like a bowling ball or a brick had been hurled across the corridor. And on the floor, still rolling, was a small balsa wood pot. And it must have weighed, I don't know, less than a postcard, less than an envelope. It weighed almost nothing. It was made of balsa wood. It said a gift from the Holy Land on the top. But the noise it made when it hit the floor, I mean, I'm just glad it didn't land on my foot.
Gift
It
from
Sonic
the
really
boom.
was
Holy Land.
tremendous. So what is going on there then? Why do objects, have you come across that? The fact that objects which are thrown by poltergeists sometimes seem to make far more noise than one would expect or land with far more force?
I can't say about the noise, but certainly there's in Welwyn Garden City, where I live in Hertfordshire. There's the Welwyn Garden City Christian Spiritualist group or Spiritualist Church, and I've done their church a few times actually, doing a platform, and they have an apport cupboard. And it's absolutely fascinating. And the claim is with apports, for the listeners, is these are objects that manifest out of nowhere, sometimes from different time zones, and just appear. And this particular apport, the cupboard in Welwyn Garden City, has got all manner of really strange objects, even what looks like Mayan or Incan kind of cloth, kind of like, if you imagine kind of like intricate kind of like beaded cloth that the Mayans might have worn. There's like a little section of that. And there's loads of other different kind of like little things that the people there swear blind that over the years these things have just manifested for their members, and they've just kind of like brought them in and put them in this cupboard. Or some of them, I think they've actually said, were manifest within circle. Now, you know, the skeptic could also always say, oh well, somebody could have brought along an object from a museum and just kind of thrown it in the circle or something. But yeah, I mean, sometimes you've got to go by these things on faith and trust, but it's a very interesting cupboard if it's true.
Yeah. I mean, you've heard of the Skull Group, I assume, the spiritual scientist
Yeah.
group,
Yeah,
Skull
yeah.
in Norfolk. I mean, I got as far as the car park. They asked me along, and I went with a very experienced investigator of mediums called Gary Skidmore from Cheltenham. And I grew up about 10 or 12 miles away. In fact, it was a funny experience once because I bumped into some members of the group when I was giving a talk in mediumship in a pub down the road. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. But I got there and I was about to go in, and I was overcome by this really strong fear, actually, of seeing something that I wouldn't, that I would be totally unable to explain. And by that point, I'd probably been a psychical investigator for 8 to 10 years. So it was a strange one, but one of the things that happened there was they received apports and objects appeared, newspapers, coins. And yeah, I think that kind of physical phenomena is fascinating because if it's real, then it really is, absolute total proof that there's something which defies all our current understanding of physics. And if it's not real, well, I suspect the people who are doing it will come unstuck on this age of high-tech surveillance stuff and infrared and who knows what kind of scanning.
Mm.
So I'm hoping it is real, really.
Certainly there is a lot of controversy over this particular subject, and indeed the spiritualist movement founded by the Fox sisters. There was a lot of shenanigans and tomfoolery, I would say, with some of their kind of background. However, having said that, there are a lot of people that I know who have been to these kind of like physical mediumship kind of demonstrations where it's not pitch black, it's dim for some reason,
Yeah.
but it's not pitch black, and they would be able to see somebody if they were kind of lurking in the shadows doing stuff. The people I've spoken to have done things in red dim light, kind of red or blue dim light, and they've still had weird things happen. Now I know Darren Brown, who's a popular kind of like illusionist and mentalist here in the UK, has done things where it was pitch black, and he's done things with kind of luminous objects and strings, and he rigged up an infrared camera so you could see that he was doing it, but that was pitch black. However,
Yeah, I mean, Richard Wiseman's done it as well. He's a friend of Derek
he had,
Brown.
yeah, oh, of course, yeah, they're all
Yeah,
the same.
and I've been in fake seances and observed them, but
Mm.
the thing is that that in those situations they quite often take place in rooms at a theatre or something like that, and you haven't got the opportunity to check the room,
Mm.
to carry out the preparation, etc., etc. I don't know. I mean, there's no doubt whatsoever that a huge number of physical mediums in the past were fraudulent. I'm absolutely certain of that.
Yes.
But there's room for doubt. Just because some are fraudulent doesn't mean they all are.
Mm.
And everybody who just turns around and says, "Oh, it's all bunk. There's no such thing as physical mediumship," I find that a very strong position to take. I certainly would never make that. I think there may well be some kind of physical phenomena associated with mediumship. It might not always turn up when you want it, and it
Mm.
might be that faking it is actually used sometimes, like the case of Eusapia Palladino. She said, "When I get bored and it doesn't happen, I fake it," which is a very human way. I mean, you fake it often, Neil.
Well, it's a way, it's a way of keeping your career going, I guess. In the down times, I guess. Now, obviously, you said that you were younger and naive when you went and investigated poltergeist. So you've obviously been doing it a long, long time, Christian. How did you get interested in the whole thing? What drew you into this whole field of research?
Right, hang on. Just before we go off the poltergeist, because otherwise I won't tell you this story. We were
Sure.
talking about how poltergeists always start to move. Yeah, you never see the object start to move, but once that happened to me, and this is after I've become a researcher, after my first experience. So it's the mid-90s, and I'm in Warwickshire, a village, in fact, called Offchurch, and there's a pub there, and the pub at Offchurch, there's only the one, so if you know it, you know it. They'd had some really weird haunting phenomena going on for a couple of weeks when we first got involved. And we ended up spending 6 months there. And members of my team lived in the pub, worked in the pub, stayed in the pub, and became like part of the family. And we swapped over who was up there. And by doing that, by being adopted by the family, we were able to really get a grip on the case. I mean, it always makes me laugh. Most ghost hunting groups turn up at a supposedly haunted location, sit around for 3 to 4 hours, go home again, or maybe a whole night, go home, and they never read anything about anybody else's experience, and they just record their own psychic impressions. And that's one way to proceed. But the visual attitude is not my method. We spent 6 months going through the history, trying to understand and trying to be part of the environment so that things would happen to us. And you know what? Not a lot did most of the time, until one night we were standing there and there's this guy called Matt and there's another guy called Derek. Now, the important bit about this story is Matt and Derek can't stand each other. Yeah? Two of my team really don't get on. They loathe each other. Matt claims Derek is a liar. Derek claims Matt is a liar. They are utterly opposed to one another. That's important to the story, though. So we're standing there, the three of us, and we're having a conversation, and a wine glass has flown across the restaurant and gone smash a few moments before. And Derek has accused Matt of throwing it. And Matt has said, it wasn't me, but he was the only person in the area when it happened. And while they're having their argument and we're discussing it, I'm standing on one side of the table next to Derek. Derek's holding a video camera in his left hand. And there's this coffee cup. You know the kind of coffee cup you get in cafes? Ceramic on a saucer? You know the kind of thing I mean?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It starts to vibrate. The saucer starts to vibrate. And we all look at it and think, that's a bit funny. Must be a heavy truck going past outside. And as we look at it and we all sort of stop talking, it starts to vibrate heavier. And then the cup lifts off it into the air until it's risen about 6 inches into the air and flies directly at Derek's crotch. And Derek steps back, pulls the video recorder up and tries to video it. And as it's about to hit him in the unmentionables, it dropped. And it didn't arc down to the floor. It just dropped as if somebody had flung it straight down. So it picks up, flies across, and drops down. And, tapping? How bizarre. Okay, sorry. Yeah, strange tapping noises were reported by Andrew just then, so I was wondering what they were. They weren't at my end as far as I know.
Yeah, we get. I don't know. It might. Neil, are you muted at the moment?
I was muted. I thought maybe it was Christian demonstrating the vibration of the cup, like tapping something.
No,
Oh, that's weird. Because I
That's
was
strange.
muted, and if you're muted, Neil, isn't
Yeah,
that weird? It's
yeah,
like a sort of. It's
yeah,
like, I'll do it on the microphone. It sounded like this.
yeah, yeah. It's Morse code from the spirit world, I think.
It's because my story's boring. It's telling me to hurry up. Okay, so yeah, what happened was this coffee cup just rose up, flew straight at his crotch, dropped down and shattered. And Matt ran over and said, well, I can't remember what he said, but it was probably not repeatable on air. He reached down, picked it up, and as he picked up a fragment of it, now this is ceramic, so it's not designed to maintain heat, yeah? You know, these coffee cups by their nature are designed not to conduct heat, else they'd be totally useless because it'd be like sticking your finger straight in the hot coffee. But he burnt his finger and his thumb, and the coffee cup had been sitting there for an hour. So whatever had moved it had also made it get really quite hot. But when I touched it, maybe 30 seconds later, it was cold. So we took loads of photographs. And then in the interest of science, we went through and we got all their cups and saucers. And I stood on a table and we threw them on the floor and smashed them, trying to replicate the fracture pattern while the landlord of the pub stood there, not sure whether to laugh or cry, while we threw his crockery around because we were trying to make it break the same way.
Did
And
he
in
make
the
you pay
end,
for it?
Sounds like a
well,
paranormal Greek wedding.
yeah, it was. It was like a paranormal Greek wedding. I eventually managed to make a sling using a tea towel on the end of a mop and sling a cup across the room, at which point it shattered in the same spectacular manner. Anyway, we got hold of a ceramics department at the uni, and they told us, "Oh no, that doesn't tell you anything because when you kiln fire a ceramic cup, the weakness lines, the fragmentation lines will be completely unique because every piece is unique because of the way the heating process works." So they said all you did was waste a lot of mugs. So we told him that, and he really didn't like it. He was going to cry. But
I
anyway,
bet you
yeah,
felt a
Did he
mug.
call you a mug as well?
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
But I mean, I actually saw that coffee cup in the air, and the problem was that almost immediately it happened. I said, "No, it can't have happened. No, I don't believe that. No, I didn't see that." And I still today, if you ask me what happened, I'll say I remember saying that happened, and I remember it happening supposedly. And I talked to Matt and Derek, and they both said, "Yeah, it happened. Yeah, no, it wasn't him. Yeah." And I mean, these were guys who didn't get on. They would have, if one of them had done it, the other one would have immediately said it was him. And there was just no way. The three of us were standing there, so something bloody weird happened at that moment. And to this day, I have no idea at all what it was. I was watching the other night. I had reason to look at an old episode of The Big Breakfast that we videoed, and we talk about it there. We recorded it about 3 weeks after it happened, and it brought it all back. So that was why I brought it up. But yeah, yeah. So I
Wow.
have seen it. What about you, Neil? Have you seen something thrown directly or?
Not really, apart from domestic arguments, but that's a different. I definitely know which way the crocker is going in that sort of thing, and
You know
I've
what to
definitely
duck.
got a valid reason why it's happening as well.
Oh.
But how did you get started off in this whole field of research then?
Well, it's a long and dull story of ghosts. Would you like to hear it or?
We'll start at the beginning. Start with the bed
All right.
sheet and move forward.
Oh no, no, no! In 1987, I had no interest in ghosts whatsoever. I thought ghosts were a load of piffle because my parents believed in ghosts, and by that time, I decided that they were superstitious peasants. As you do when you're a teenager, you know better than your parents, and I was really quite. In fact, I thought religion was a load of rubbish as well. I was quite opinionated, as 18-year-olds are prone to be. We'd been at a war games meeting over in Thetford in Norfolk, and when we left, one of my mates said, "I need the loo." Well, it's a 16-mile journey home in the car, and he suddenly, 2 minutes after we've left the venue and never locked it up, he decides he needs to go. Anyway, so we pull over and we pull off the flyover in Thetford, and you come down to this car park, and suddenly you're at this ruined abbey or priory, Thetford Priory, and it's just a Flintstones. It's just a stone ruin in a park. It's basically a public park with some old stone buildings in it.
CJ, just stop you there. Would that be combat airsoft by any chance?
Combat Airsoft?
In
No.
Thetford.
No, I know of them. Actually, my friend John Ball, who died recently, was used to play there. But no, no, this is just up the road from there. That Combat Airsoft. I don't know where they meet. Actually, probably out on the Common. I would have thought.
Oh, let me know because I'd like to find that venue and indeed that abbey that you're talking about. Sounds interesting.
Okay, well, it's right in the middle of town. If you go right into the middle of Thetford, anyone
Hmm.
can go there. It's English heritage, but it's a
Right.
public park. And over the years, I now know there've been many, many, many sightings there. But
Ah,
when we went, we didn't know anything of the sort. We just went there so my friend could go into the bushes and have a wee. And we walked quite away from the car park to get away from the road, obviously. And there's this building with a load of arches and windows in it. And we thought it was an intact building, obviously. But we were standing looking at it while our mate went down to have a wee, where there was a pond. It's not there anymore. They filled it in because I think somebody drowned in it. But anyway, as we were watching the building, this guy appears up at the upstairs window and he's wearing what looks like a sheet over his head. Now it's 8 o'clock in the evening on August the 8th. So it's, at 8 o'clock on August the 8th, it's not dark, it's bright sunshine. So it's not night time. That's the important bit. That's probably why we're so far away. Thinking about it, yeah, it wasn't night time at all. It was bright daylight. But so yeah, we're watching this guy with this black sheet over his head. And we think, oh. And I said to Darren, "Hey, look, there's some joker pretending to be a ghost. He's trying to scare us." So we walked forwards towards the building, and this guy comes down the stairs towards us. And Darren, who's clearly watched too many episodes of Scooby Doo, said, "Let's get him." So the other three stand there watching us while me and Darren run. Now I'm too fat to run. I've got a slightly camp daft waddle, but I run after him. Darren hits the staircase first, and I'm not quite sure what happens because as we go forwards, this guy starts to go up the stairs. And I'm actually chasing Darren mainly to stop him jumping on the bloke and stop it turning into a fight because I think, this is all getting a bit out of hand. But Darren runs into the thing and he falls through the staircase. And I can't, my brain doesn't get that. And then I go through the staircase and slam into the back wall. And I look up and I can see the sky overhead. And I realise there is no upstairs. There's nowhere for the ghost to have come down. There's no staircase. And, he can't have been at the upstairs window because there's no floor there. And at that point, I completely freak out and we run back to the car. And as we run back to the car, there was this weird feeling as if we were slipping back in time, as if somehow the Priory was getting more real around us. I never tell that part of the story because it was just a psychological. And it felt like, this is the really weird bit, it felt like I was sinking into the ground. With every step, it felt like I was falling further into the ground as if I was running up to my waist. And my legs were turning to rubber. And Axel shouted, "Jump the walls, break its reality, jump the walls," which sounds really Doctor Who, doesn't it? So we jumped we jumped over the stone walls, and we got back to the car, and it was clear that something really, really weird had happened. I mean, something absolutely, 5 people seeing it all in daylight. So we looked at one another and decided, we got to get out of here. So we went home, and Dave Orchett said, well. He was doing A-level psychology. He said, look, it's totally pointless if we talk about this. Let's go home, sit down, everybody writes down what happened. So we went back and we wrote our accounts. And we wrote 5 separate accounts. And it's funny, actually, because we didn't all see exactly the same thing. There was slight discrepancies between what we saw. But we all agreed on the basic principles that there was a figure. The figure was upstairs. The figure came down the stairs. It retreated when we approached it. And to me, that was the beginning, because up till that point, I thought only mad people saw ghosts. And I certainly wasn't mad. And I certainly saw something that most people would call a ghost. And that was why I decided to join. Well, I went to university, changed what degree I was going to do. I was going to do Anglo-Saxon history, and I ended up doing philosophy and religion and history. And then after that, I went into psychology and became a psychiatric nurse and made my way through academia for 15 years, trying to get the kind of skills that I would need to make an effort to understand hauntings.
Now that's really interesting, Christian, because you've got a psychology background and even a psychiatric background, as you're saying. How did you and your friend, also with a psychology background, kind of reconcile this very strange experience as not, for instance, being like a mass hallucination or something? How would you know the difference between that and it actually being a paranormal experience?
Well, mass hallucinations, I mean, it might well have been a hallucination, but that doesn't mean that it's not paranormal. We're all used to the notion of hallucinations because we all dream, I expect. When you're dreaming, you're hallucinating, you're creating a mental landscape that isn't real. And most drugs, most hallucinations, most fever hallucinations are actually technically pseudo hallucinations. So although we're seeing something, we're aware that it's not real. But when we have a ghost experience, it could be that the process by which we actually see the ghost is a hallucination. Am I making any sense at all?
Yeah.
So it could be that the 5 of us actually hallucinated the same figure because we all saw something slightly different. Marcus drew it as looking like, if you've ever seen Spider-Man in his black Spider-Man costume, it looked like that, whereas I drew a triangle with 3 sparkly dots, like a lady in a crinoline dress. And Darren drew and Axel both drew what looked like a traditional monk in a cowl robe, in a black robe. It was a Cluniac Abbey, so black was actually appropriate, it turned out subsequently, but we didn't know that at the time. But the point about the experience is that we either saw a physical form that manifested and was physically there and was reflecting light photons, the figure was in some sense real, or we all hallucinated the figure, which doesn't make it any less real because we all hallucinated exactly the same thing. So if we're all hallucinating the same thing, it might be that the information is stored in the environment. We psychically receive the information, and then our brains hallucinate the information as a way of showing it to us.
Yeah, it really does come back down to that whole reality perception thing. Is it something that you're seeing externally with your eyes and perceiving externally, or, as you say, is it something that's kind of like projecting itself into your minds? And the weird thing is, if you're interpreting things in different ways, i.e. you're seeing slightly different things, it kind of shows that each individual's perception kind of like twists or puts its own skew on the information that's being presented to it, if you see what I mean.
Well, isn't that the case with anything? I mean, if you ask 5 witnesses to a crime, if I walk into one of my lectures, produce a gun and shoot a student in the front row who screams and falls to the ground, obviously we've set it up. But then we ask the other students afterwards to say what happened after they've, finished suing us for trauma. Then they will all give slightly different accounts as to who was wearing what the order of events was. Almost anything in real life that happens, you don't get consistent testimony on. Psychologists have shown. Loftus's experiments are particularly useful in that respect. She's a famous psychologist who showed that eyewitness testimony in crimes is almost totally unreliable, which is unfortunate, really.
It is.
But there you go. But what I was going to say was, we weren't. There is a simple test. Do you want to be sued by your listeners?
Hopefully not, but it depends what you get.
Oh, go on. You want to. I accept no legal responsibility for anyone daft enough to try this. But if you see an apparition,
Nor do we. But carry on.
No, yeah. Take a finger and place it on the side of your eye and gently press on your eyeball. If you do that now, do you see double?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah? So you can see double now, yeah?
Yeah.
So that's because the physical photons are coming in. It's a physical effect. It's caused by light reflecting and the shape of the eyeball deforming.
I think I'm pressing the wrong ball.
Stop pressing your balls, Neil. If you do that now, and if you can see double, then there's something that's physically external. If it's a hallucination, there'll still only be one.
That's interesting.
So the figure would stay static. It won't move with the visual field. And there's a term for when you hallucinate, and the hallucination is imposed on your visual field, so it appears to be part of it. It's called a metachoric state, but we're not going to go into that because it's horrendously technical.
We will state that Paranormal Peep Show takes no responsibility for any actions of listeners following the advice or anything of our guests.
If in the event you poke your own eye out,
yeah,
please don't blame us. Yeah,
we would advise people not to poke their own eyes out.
Ironically, I've actually taken my dad to the hospital today to actually have injections in his eyes. Would you believe? So it's very topical that these eyeball things come up. And it's Halloween, so it all kind of fits with the synchronicity of it.
I'm imagining a punch bowl full of kind of like orange liquid and eyeballs just bobbing up and down with a ladle.
Help yourself. Those people, these eyes have been fully tested on hallucinations and they taste great, yeah.
But it's interesting what you're saying, CJ, in terms of this and whether it's hallucination or not, because I mean, my kind of like background in all of this is kind of, as I say, like a clairvoyant and a medium, and I trained in circle and all that kind of thing. So like clairvoyance to me is kind of like, literally it means clear seeing. And so some of the visualizations that we do, we visualize in our mind, and hopefully kind of spirit or psychically we get visions. And these are, are they hallucinations or are they real? The idea is
But you're saying they're one thing or the other, which isn't the case.
Exactly. This is what I was going to lead on to. It's like it's the perception of hallucinations are that they are not real. However, I would argue that maybe that whatever the process of hallucinations are, they sometimes, some of them can be a paranormal nature and are from like a realistic source, so to speak, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, a hallucination is just another method of getting information to your brain.
Yeah.
So imagine for a moment that suddenly at this point the filing cabinet falls over again and crushes me to death, and I go quiet with a kind of anguished squeak. Eek! There you go, that was my anguished squeak. And a moment or two later, you see a fat, frabjous freak with not much hair left, that's me, appear laying on your floor, crushed under a filing cabinet. Now, it could be that all it is that my dying brain has sent a telepathic message to you, and that you being psychic, you've received it. But the process by which you've taken that ESP and you've made it work so you understand that you're receiving ESP is that your brain then hallucinates the scene as if it was present in the room.
Just to explain that again, CJ.
Right, so the event caused at this end that results in my unfortunate demise when I'm crushed by a filing cabinet.
Yeah.
I then send a signal by ESP, by telepathy. Your brain picks up the telepathic signal, gains the information, but doesn't know how to tell you because it's you don't normally listen to it's come by a non-standard source. So what it does is it causes a hallucination. So you see it as a ghost in front of your eyes.
Oh, I see. So it's
So
your brain is trying to make some sense of something and formulating in something that you don't
it's
understand.
it's trying to tell you something, and
Yeah,
it does it by making you hallucinate it. So it could be that ghosts are actually telepathy playing out. We're picking up stuff by ESP,
yeah.
and then the
Just
ghost is just the brain's way of showing us what signal it's receiving.
I think you're exactly right, and I tell you why I think you're right is that our bodies, how we are, our human bodies are biological robots that a soul is inhabiting, so to speak. Now, when that soul moves on to whatever dimension it goes on, spirit realm or whatever, it has no need for the physical body and isn't really in that form of a physical body. So when it goes over, it is either just light or just consciousness. And what may carry on is kind of like a holographic representation of what it looked like here in this human plane. So
Okay.
when granddad or nan or mum or dad shows themselves in apparition form to somebody here down on this plane of life, this physical plane, they will show themselves what they look like in a human form. However, their true form is probably more along the lines of orbs or kind of pure light or pure consciousness. If that
Yeah,
makes sense.
I had a friend who died this month actually called Sharon, who was Sharon Stevens. Her daughter's a famous skeptic, but she was herself very skeptical, but also something of a believer. And she once saw an apparition that she said was sepia toned, like an old photograph. And that got me thinking: have you ever seen a photograph, a photographic, not a ghost photograph, but a ghost that appears not naturalistically, but as if it was in a photograph?
Yeah, oh, plenty. Yeah, plenty.
Yeah, Neil, you ever had that experience?
I've never seen a ghost, I have to say.
Oh, okay. We were down years ago, down at Dursley in Gloucestershire, the Bell Inn on Long Street. If anyone wants to go there, you can book a room there for about 30 quid, spend the night in haunted room 6. It really is haunted, or for some value of haunted. I've had weird experiences there that I can't easily explain. Doesn't mean to say that I'm saying they're dead people knocking on the door, but I'd certainly say it's worth going and staying there. Only thing is, on a weekend, there's a nightclub underneath. So I remember we did a ghost hunt there one night. And the nightclub was so loud that the bed was actually vibrating across the floor and objects were like moving on the table. And all we could hear was this thumping, banging drum and bass. And then suddenly, in the spirit of Most Haunted, somebody shouted, "CJ, did you hear that? What? Really bad mix." I
Polterdisco.
thought I heard a
Post
slight tap. Did someone just whisper? We were shouting and doing semaphore. It's not conducive to ghost hunting, really. But during the week when the nightclub's not open, it really is an interesting place. Why was I telling the story of the Bell Inn? What was I talking about? Where am I? Who am I? Oh, photographic ghost. Yeah. Sorry, I get lost. I'm old.
We all do, don't worry.
So I came down. I was upstairs there one night with a bunch of ghost hunters, and we'd had some really weird stuff go down during the course of the evening. And one of the guys who was in a band at the time, he was in a punk industrial band, the Chaos Engine, he went downstairs, and as he walked into the dining room, he came out again, and he was white as a sheet. And I mean, this guy's built, I mean, a massive bloke. He's a strong bloke with a Mohican. He came out and just looked at me and went, "There's a woman in there." "What? There's a woman in there?" So we went in and had a look, and, there was no one there. And he said, she was a black woman wearing a white dress with a black apron. And he said, the weird thing was, she wasn't actually a lady, or a person of colour. She wasn't a lady from, from a black heritage. She appeared to him as if she was a photographic negative. And I thought, what the hell? I've read ghost stories galore ever since I was, 18. I've read so many ghost stories and I've read through the whole of the Census of Hallucinations, the report on it. I've read through my girlfriend's PhD research on ghosts. I've never come across another ghost in negative. I have actually since found one other story. But then my friend Sharon told me about her sepia-toned ghost that appeared like it was in an old photo. And I mean, she thought, to start with, she said maybe it's fading away, maybe it's a recording, and the more it plays, the less colour there is in it. And I thought, well, yeah, maybe. But then another thought came to me, and this is the psychologist in me, which is, if we're right, and I doubt I am because I'm never right, but if we were picking up an ESP impulse and then hallucinating the ghost, so the ghost is real in the sense that it's real information, but our mind's actually constructing it and showing us what the message we're receiving is, then maybe we create it out of the images we have available in our memory. And maybe if we haven't seen a lot of Victorian maids, so we think of an old photograph of one we once saw. And so it appeared to him as a photo he'd seen of a Victorian maid, and somehow his mind made it turn into a negative, or he'd seen a negative, I don't know. But whatever was going on, there's something deeply weird. And Sharon and me, we started to work on that, this idea that maybe we're limited when we're hallucinating to using images from our childhood, or images from our life, or images from, so that we're, things we've seen in films, so that the apparition might not be exactly what we're seeing. It's the closest fit we can produce from our memories.
That's a really interesting concept, really interesting, because another kind of like possibility, could there be like some weird glitch in the matrix? Could it be like an odd anomaly just in reality that's just glitched into your mind?
Well, when we did Thetford Priory, when we did it, we did an account of it, which you can find on YouTube most of the time, or certainly it's on the net. It's an episode of Ghost Hunters called Ripples in Time, and the first half of it's about a time slip down in Surrey, I believe, which happened to Horace and Irene Barton, her bookshop owners. But the second half of the show, the last 12 minutes, is us talking about our experience at Thetford. And they called it Ripples in Time because the producer said, do you think it was a time slip? Do you think you were going back in time? Because the sense that it was getting more real as you were running away. It sounds like somehow you were entering into the wrong time. But actually, I don't know. I've never... The classic time slip stories are the Versailles Adventure, which happened to two ladies in 1904, Mrs. Mobley and Mrs. Jourdain in Paris, where they were walking around the gardens of Versailles and they thought they saw characters from the time of Marie Antoinette, possibly even slightly earlier. There's been a lot of research done on it. And the book is currently out of print because the lady, I think it's Mrs. Mobley's niece, but I'm not sure, it's certainly the estate of one of them, who owns the rights to the book. She was convinced by a skeptical explanation that what they had seen was entirely understandable. They just got lost and confused. And unfortunately, they didn't write it up until they'd done considerable research, which shaped their memory of the experience. And then there's another famous time slip where two English ladies went to France on holiday in Dieppe, at Le Poise. And while they were at Le Poise, they heard the sound of the Battle of Dieppe, the raid on Dieppe from the Second World War. And it actually, their account of what happened, they heard machine gun fire and artillery fire, etc., through the night. And it seems to correspond very well with the official war history record of the battle. However, and this is also interesting, a skeptic was able to show that there was a dredger operating in the harbour that night, and he suggests that all they heard was the noise of the dredger. And so again, that came under great doubt. So I don't know how many good time slips there are. There's a village in Suffolk called Kersey, where two sailors in the 50s, not always two English women in France, this was two British sailors in Suffolk, but they went into the village and they said it was like going back in time to the 16th century, and they were convinced they'd gone back to the late Middle Ages because everything around them seemed to change. The shops changed and everything changed. Andrew Mackenzie wrote a detailed account of it. The trouble is that if you go out to Kersey nowadays, it really is that primitive, so I don't know about time slips. What do you think?
Interestingly, talking about that, I don't know if you remember the old series Strange But True with Michael Aspel in the 1990s.
Of course I do, yeah.
Talking about time slips, now, one of my favourite ever cases, and I hope it's true because I'd love to believe it's true, was a time slip of a family that went to, I believe it was Belgium or France, or the kind of like the border there, and they went to this they were looking last minute in the evening time for kind of like a hotel B&B type thing.
Oh, yes, and they stay in the hotel and then it's not there when they go back.
That's it. And not only was it not there, whilst they were there, everything seemed as though it was like in the 1910s or 1920s. Everything was old fashioned. And it gets so weird because they were handing over modern money. And at that time, I think it was francs as opposed to euros. They were handing over modern money and these people were accepting it. But even though they were dressed kind of like in vintage, and they even had like a vintage hello style kind of like gendarme type person come in and kind of like have a word with them, and everything was kind of like everything was just so vintage and old and 1920s. And as you say, later on, a couple of years later, they thought, wasn't that strange? Wouldn't it be nice to go and visit that old place again? And the place that they went to, there was nothing there at all. As you say, it was completely flattened. And they asked the locals, where's that lovely hotel? And they said something like it had been flattened or demolished in the 1950s or something. Absolutely bizarre.
Yeah, I mean, there's a number of stories like that. There's one like that from a doctor and his wife in the Isle of Wight. There was another one in Hampshire, and the SPR spent a lot of time trying to trace down the buildings in each case, and skeptics spent their time driving around Hampshire trying to find the hotel that was referred to. The earliest version I can think of that is from about 1910. It's in Elliot O'Donnell's, one of his books. Have you come across Elliot O'Donnell?
No? I've heard the name. I've not come across them personally.
No, well, he's been dead for a long, long time. But Elliot O'Donnell was an absolutely amazing raconteur. I would say he was a pathological liar, but I'd like to believe that some of what he said was true. But he certainly exaggerated his cases. But he was probably the first great ghost hunter. And everyone's heard of Harry Price and Borley Rectory, but Elliot O'Donnell had been doing it for 30 years before Price came on the scene, you see. And O'Donnell wrote about 40 or 50 books, I believe. So he's certainly definitely worth looking into. But one of his cases that he records is a traveller who, in the 19th century, he's coming down into, I think it's Dursley he's going to, from Stroud. But anyway, he's in a terrible snowstorm, and he's on Minchinhampton Common, which is high above the town of Stroud, up on what's effectively a mountaintop. There's a plateau, and if you drive along it, as I did yesterday, the cows walk across the road backwards and forwards. And you have to be really quite careful, because at night, it's only too easy to drive into a cow. It's like the ponies in the New Forest. They're allowed to roam where they want on the common. Anyway, he came down and he came across a pub up there. And he went into the pub and he was given superb hospitality, and he stayed all night. But he was anxious to finish his journey, and seeing the weather had improved, he woke up before dawn and he decided to leave. So he left some coins to pay for his stay. He tipped generously, left the coins on the table, went outside, got his horse and rode down into Stroud. And when he was there, he asked, well, what was the name of that inn I stayed in? And I would have thought it was the Bear at Rodborough, which is a pub up that kind of direction. But they said, no, there's no pub there. There never has been a pub there. So eventually he got so frustrated, he takes a doctor or a travelling gentleman with him, and they go back up and they find the spot where the inn was, and the silver coins are still left on a rock where the table had been. And he realises that it was the fairies who took him in for the night, and that he'd been, and it is a literal fairy story, the idea of fairy hospitality and fairy buildings which disappear. And for that reason, I found it interesting, because I'm quite fascinated by fairy stories, or rather by real stories of fairies, I should say. And doesn't it sound pretty much like the case that you've just described?
It is, and it makes you just when you think you've got reality sussed, or that you have a basic understanding of how these things work, something will come along like this that just puts a massive monkey wrench in the whole system, and you think, what? Because there's so many other questions, like physically, what was happening to these people? Were they, for instance, just collapsed on the floor on a grass bank and having almost like a Matrix style reality imposed on them, where they think they're in a hotel and they're interacting and they're eating food, but in actual fact they're just passed out on a grass bank, and then they wake up thinking that was real and then go home? Or is there another actual physical reality that's manifested out of nowhere, that they're actually going into an actual building and talking to actual spirit or whatever paranormal type people, and then leaving, and then that physical reality disappears? I mean, it's just
it's very bizarre. I'm going to have to interrupt, because we're going to have to take a reality break now.
We are, yes.
We'll be talking more about the fairies after this break, and we've got our guest here, Christian Jensen Rome, who's been talking about poltergeist, time slips and ghosts and things like that. So we'll see you guys in a minute after these messages.
I'm Sonia Bros, Catholic, charismatic, and spiritual warrior who has spent years fighting negative forces. My new book, The Curse of El Diablo, has just been published by Glennet Ty. The Curse of El Diablo is the true story of my journey to northern Mexico to help a family tormented by an evil sorcerer skilled in the arts of brujeria. But I soon found myself in a dangerous struggle as I battled the evil forces thrown at me by this brujo, and it was only my faith in God that protected me from the onslaught. The Curse of El Diablo is an epic story of a struggle between the forces of good and evil and the triumph of faith over darkness. The Curse of El Diablo is now available in softcover and ebook format on Amazon.com and on GlanetTie.com.
Hello, this is Lord Lewis Smythe, formerly of the House of Lords, and you're listening to the Paranormal UK Radio Network. Oh, sorry about that.
And welcome back to Paranormal Peep Show with myself, Andy Chaplin, and Neil Geddes-Ward. So, CJ, where do we leave off? Fairies and woodlands and strange experiences, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, we were talking about people who've stayed in a hotel, and you were saying, well, did they sleep on the grass verge? Did they sleep in the snow? When they go back, the hotel isn't there. I mean, the skeptic in me, the sane person in me says, well, obviously what happened was they were confused about where they were. And I know how difficult it is sometimes for me to retrace my steps and find my way back to somewhere. Beck and I went out in the country one night, and we went past this strange building on the way to my sister's. And we were absolutely convinced it was so weird. We'd never seen it before. And we were convinced that, we'd seen something odd. And as it happened, on the way home, we spent over an hour and a half driving around Suffolk until quite by chance we finally managed to stumble upon it and realised where we'd gone wrong. But otherwise, we would have had one of these experiences. Now, okay, we didn't go in and talk to anybody. We didn't experience it in that level. But it seemed deeply weird to us until we actually found it again and realised that we were just a bit rubbish at navigation. So maybe there is a practical answer. Then again, what about those people who go into little metal discs which come down from the stars and have those experiences, and when they go back, the metal discs aren't there? I mean, it's very similar to the alien abduction narrative, isn't it?
Well, it's interesting you bring that up because this often comes up on our shows, and I actually think there is some weird correlation between the UFO experience and the ET abduction experience and paranormal, poltergeist, ghostly type experiences as well. Historically speaking, there's been two camps. There's been the UFO people and the ghost people, and never the twain shall meet. But I'm finding more and more there are correlations, and when you start bumping into people like the Kinsella twins, you begin to realize that a lot of alien abductees and contactees are also kind of like mediums and work with ghosts and spirits as well. So it's an interesting kind of crossover field there.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people that talk about are the modern day alien sightings the same as the fairies. I think it was Jacques Vallée, I believe, that would kind of reference that. Is he wondered if the Greys abducting people was the same thing as fairies taking people away and they lose time and things like that. But I'm not so sure. I actually think that there seems to be a strict difference in many of the encounters with fairy folk, from certainly the things I've heard of anyway, than the aliens.
I think it's not so much that I'm not really saying that you get ghosts turning up with ETs. It's more kind of the nature of the experience, i.e. the other dimensional kind of encounters. Like when CJ was talking about being in the Abbey in Thetford, he was saying it was almost like a slip in time. It's almost as if like sinking in the ground and like a different kind of like reality. And alien abductees also feel this kind of like sinking into their bed type feeling, and almost as if time either stays still or they're kind of like taken out of their time zone and then put back in their time zone, if you see what I mean.
There's another symptom actually that's very strongly associated or correlated with the time slip experiences, which was the Versailles, the Dieppe, and a number of the others took place on hot, humid occasions. The people felt a sense of boredom, lethargy, almost headachiness, and they felt a slight sense of unreality about the day. But it was a kind of heavy, humid atmosphere, and they fell into moods of sullen depression while the experiences was going on. That seems to be common to a number of time slip narratives, but not to the ones in the evening when they're actually staying at a hotel where everyone seems to have a great time and enjoy it. I suppose because if you went to a hotel and you had a sullen, miserable time and it was humid and you didn't enjoy it, you wouldn't go back. But yeah, the time slip, it's almost as if they're entering into some different kind of reality.
Have you had any fairy encounters then, Christian?
I've spoken to dozens of people who have. I haven't myself. The thing that I remember when I first picked up on was that a number of them spoke about the beings glowing with their own internal light, as if they were lit up from within. But they were always very naturalistic. The little man at the bottom of the garden, but they were always also flower fairy sized. Apart from a couple of gnome stories and one kind of goblinoid in the wood story, I've never come across, your tall Tolkien type elf fairies, your classic medieval fairies. They've always been small nature sprites or beings of light that people have described to me. Yeah, I've spoken to so many witnesses that I'm as convinced people see fairies as I'm convinced people see ghosts. I still don't know what they are, but I'm absolutely certain they're real.
Again, the correlation thing
To them.
about the gnome experience. I don't know if you've come across Philip Kinsella, CJ.
No, I don't know anything about him, I'm afraid.
He's a really wonderful guy. He does Twin Souls with his brother Ronnie Kinsella, and they're both mediums, and they're both
Right.
twins and alien abductees. And one of Philip's encounters with UFOs was he describes a very small, angry-looking dwarf gnome-type creature with a tall blue pointy hat, and this was in conjunction with a UFO abduction experience.
Okay.
So. Goodness knows. I mean, is this one of the ET entities taking the form of a gnome to try and kind of, I don't know, soothe the situation? But then why is the gnome angry? Or are the gnomes that people are seeing in medieval times and Nordic times or whatever actually kind of extra-dimensional entity beings that have no human soul whatsoever but present themselves in a gnome-like form for whatever reason?
Well, that's what I've always wondered, which is, are the beings who only can contact us through consciousness because they don't have a physical form? They are consciousnesses, but they inhabit a world within or alongside our own. And I mean, this sounds absolutely nuts, doesn't it? But it would explain so much about the strange experiences people have had throughout history. Then again, the human brain is a phenomenally complicated thing. It's possibly one of the most complicated things, if not the most complicated thing in the universe. And I'm pretty sure that the human brain is capable of managing to generate all kinds of things on its own. So,
But then again, we get animals as our companions who also sort of pick up on these things. They sort of
That's
detect
true.
there's an ET or something strange in the garden or something upstairs it doesn't want to go and see. So in the same way that we might use like a little bird to go into a cave to see if it's full of poisonous gases, dogs and cats are our extra senses, as it were.
they absolutely are. Yeah, Neil, what would you say were the attributes of the fairy experience? Have you ever seen a fairy or
I
encountered?
felt like a small gnome type of creature near me once when I was doing a reading on someone. And I sat with this guy, and I thought I was going to do an afterlife kind of communication, kind of mediumistic reading. And I started to sense this small sort of person sort of standing to my right. And I said, this is strange. I've got a very, very small person here, like a gnome type of character. And he goes, oh, that's interesting. He says, I've been told by another medium that I do have this gnome that follows me around. And I thought that's very interesting. So he actually went on to tell me that, years earlier when he lived at home, I mean, he was kind of an elderly gent when I knew him, but when he was younger, he said that his father had told him a very interesting story where he said that the father saw his wife walk up to the end of the garden, and he said he saw this weird kind of if you think of Rupert Bear, there was a character called Raggedy or something, I think it was in Rupert Bear stories and also in the TV show. He said it was almost like that, like a sort of wooden, sticky, insecty person was following the mother up the end of the garden, but seemed to be swaying around as if they're blowing in the wind a little bit and had a weird walk. And apparently his dad was very, very sceptical of all these sorts of things, but he did think it was an interesting kind of description that he gave of this being, the way it seemed to blow in the wind as it followed his mum to the end of the garden. I mean, I've had some very, very, like you, I've heard some very, very strange stories from very interesting people. But I've also, there was a brilliant film, documentary documentary. I've mentioned it before on this show and to the Kinsella twins. Only one of them is mediumistic. I should correct Andy that, and that's Philip. Ronnie always says that he can't lift a skin off a rice pudding, so we're back to the rice puddings in the fridge again.
Oh, yes.
But he said that I mentioned this to Ronnie and Philip about this thing called the Fairy Faith, which is a video I saw some years ago, and you can actually get it on YouTube now. This filmmaker called John Walker went around Ireland and Scotland and other places, and he interviewed various people. And one of the people he interviewed was this Glaswegian builder who had gone on holiday to Ireland, and he said he kept hearing this weird, strange music. So he decided to sit down and take the view in, which had just stopped raining. The sun was coming through the clouds, a rainbow was forming over the valley, and all the while he could hear this weird music, and he felt he could see something in his peripheral vision, but he didn't want to take his eyes off the scene unfolding. He saw that there was something down near his feet in his peripheral vision, but he still kept his eyes on that Irish landscape, the beauty of it all, and just taking in the tranquil scene. And all the while, this thing was still bugging him out the corner of his eye. So he decided to look down, and there was this small woman, about sort of a foot high, who appeared to be cutting around the sole of his shoe. She had brown leathery looking skin, a brown leathery looking hat, and she had a pair of old style sheep shears, and she was cutting around the sole of his shoe. And where his shadow extended, there was the male equivalent of this woman, again about a foot high, and this is where it gets freaky. He was rolling up the shadow of this guy. He was literally rolling it up like paper, and the woman being was separating it from his shoe and literally trying to cut it away from him. And he looked at them and said, "Oi!" And they both looked at each other and think, "Oh my God, he can see us." And they went, "Psh," and just vanished. And that was a freaky one. So, that defies physics, and God knows how you explain that one.
It's absolutely amazing, though, isn't it? I mean, it's a perfect story of a fairy encounter. Most of the ones I've heard are much simpler, actually. Andrew, have you got experiences of this nature?
No, I can't say in terms of fairy stuff. I'm very interested in it, and I'm sure we're talking about weird glitches in the Matrix here, or some kind of like hacking into reality from another reality. But in terms of experiencing it, no, only the weird poltergeist type stuff after my dad passed. But then again, could that be fairy related? We'll never know, really.
Well, I mean, the question is, are there ultra-terrestrials? Are there other entities out there who are trying to communicate with us? Are there other forms of intelligence? The problem is that they're not necessarily pleasant. I mean, the Americans are very fond of describing anything like this as a demon, really, aren't they, at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, you go into any kind of ghosty type show, and yeah, everything's demon this and demon that. I do believe there is demonic forces and there are dark forces, but there's also light forces. I think there's a balance. There's the two. Because I mean, if you go with for instance, the spiritual community or the spiritualist community, everything's kind of love and light. It's all kind of like angels and loved ones. But if you go in some of the ghost hunting communities, it's all demons and dark forces. But yeah. I don't think it's either one or. I think it's a bit of both and.
Maybe it depends on which kind of where you're coming from, what playing field you are, because the demons, if we want to call them demons, might be justifying everything they do in their book, and us to them, we are the demons from their point of view, because we're the ones that are doing completely opposite what they want to get sorted.
Do you know what? I think it really comes down to intent. I really do. I think that if somebody is going down the spiritual pathway and they're joining a development circle and they wish to kind of communicate with spirit from a love angle, which is where I started and how I went down the road, I can honestly say that 90%, 95% of my encounters with spirit are positive. They're kind of like they're loved ones from family, or they're kind of like very positive messages and very uplifting kind of like encounters. Whereas if you go into the intent of, say, using a Ouija board or down the ghost hunting thing, what you're wanting is thrills and spills. What a lot of people are seeking are scares. They're seeking the adrenaline rush. They're seeking the fear factor. And I think those, because they have that intention, the energy they connect with are oh, well, you know what, let's give them that. Let's freak them out. Let's do the scratches and the marks and the glass shattering and that kind of thing. What do you guys reckon?
I think there's a lot to be said for that. I mean, the thing is, when we talk about the paranormal community, there's every so often I see groups who are trying to bring together the paranormal community or police the paranormal community or create a charter for the paranormal community. But people interested in the paranormal are completely disparate. And many of the American ghost hunters come from a strongly religious background. I mean, there's a very, very, very strong Roman Catholic community of ghost hunters in America who really do, look at things in terms of The Exorcist. And I personally, I can sympathise with that. But there's also other groups who've got their own peculiarities. In my case, I suppose most of my early experiences were charging around in the dark looking for ghosts after the Thetford experience. We went legend tripping. We did what generations of British teenagers have, which is put your girlfriend in a car, or at least a group of girls you'd hope one of them will become your girlfriend, and drive out in the dark and go and look for spooks. Isn't that how most people start in the UK?
In the hope that they get so scared they cling to you and cuddle you.
Yeah, exactly.
Is that where the term "they put the willies up" you comes from?
Oh, it scared the pants off me. Well, hopefully, but I once took a young lady ghost hunting. It was at a village near Suffolk, and there was a story of a murdered maiden who died down by a pathway, and I took her and a friend along, and the three of us were sitting in the bush. And I mean, I've got pretty good eyesight, but suddenly I saw this white thing coming towards me across the field, and it went, "Oh!" And of course, so I got quite freaked out and excited, and they just laughed at me because it was quite clearly to them a cow. It was just a white face of a cow just mooing at me. But to me, it was a full-blown apparition. So after that, I got nowhere with that young lady. But I think that is how a lot of people, that in the UK community, a lot of it was light-hearted. And until Most Haunted came along and made it all terrifyingly slick and green-screened Paris Hilton-style videotaping, where everything's shot in night vision and it's all a bit blurry and you're shooting up people's noses half the time. And I mean, I've got nothing against Most Haunted. I was on it. So and I worked for them as a researcher for a series, so I can't really slag it off. They're nice enough people, but that made most groups, the ghost hunting culture we now have has emerged and been shaped by paranormal TV. It is not ghost hunting culture that we had in the 90s.
Oh, sorry, talking of poltergeist. So
yeah, that loud noise was an object falling on me.
Another one.
Another
very busy in your place.
Talking about poltergeist.
It's not the missus. She's not here. She did a PhD actually in apparitions. I think she's the only person, probably in the UK, probably in the world actually, who's got a PhD in the apparitional experience.
Yeah.
So it's a shame she can't be here to talk today, but she's not well. So.
Oh, well, we wish her well and hope she recovers soon. And what sort of job, when you get a PhD and you go for an interview and they look through your CV and you say, "Oh, I see you've got a PhD in apparitions. Yeah, we need you in marketing." Or something. How does that work?
No, that doesn't work. You don't get a job, as she's discovering. She's at the moment she's between jobs. She spends a lot of her time working in film and television, but not as a parapsychologist, sadly. So there you go. Anyway, yeah, one of the things I will say is very few of the parapsychological community actually make any money out of it at all. I mean, a few of them are employed as academics and lecturers, but it's a handful. Still, there are about 13 universities now in the UK that offer parapsychology at either postgraduate level or have some parapsychology at undergraduate.
Is there a cover-up? This is what I wonder. Is there a cover-up in the whole gamut of UFOs and ghosts and afterlife and things like that? I mean, there seems to be so much evidence out there for this kind of thing, but then there's the mainstream saying, no, it doesn't exist, go back to your TV, etc., etc. Is there something happening that we should be told about, but we're not?
Not in parapsychology, I don't think. When I was young, I thought maybe the government were hushing up secret paranormal experiments and that, maybe there was lots of stuff going on and ESP experiments and that they had all kinds of weird and wonderful knowledge about stuff that they weren't telling us. But the older that I get and the more people are high up in those fields than me, high up in parapsychology, etc., the more I realise that actually no, it's just that we really don't know very much. I mean, have you ever read the UFO reports that the British government released?
Well, see, I'm a bit sceptical of those reports. The ones they release, a lot of people claim that's the ones they're quite happy to release. It's the ones they're holding back that you're not going to know about.
Yeah, I mean, the ones I'm aware of have all now been released, I think. They've all been released. But things like Rendlesham, I don't think there's a cover up there. I really don't. I think there's a confused narrative and something deeply weird went on, but I don't actually think the RAF had the slightest idea what the Americans were up to. And I think they wanted to know. And I get the idea that the RAF doesn't know anyway. I mean, the Americans might be covering stuff up. Who knows? I've got no idea. It is the nature of governments to indulge in secrecy. The weird bit is actually that the real conspiracies, the really, really, really weird stuff, nobody talks about at all. And yeah, I mean, I kind of sometimes I stumble across stuff that leaves me open mouthed. I'm trying to think of some examples, but certainly if you go back to the Victorian period and you're reading through history and you come across some of the weird stuff, or like the fact that, what was he called? Downing? The air commander, vice marshal, air marshal.
Your country needs you, Downing. That one.
Second World War, yeah, not Kitchener, but yeah,
Okay.
the head of the RAF. He was the head of the RAF.
Yeah.
Bomber Command and Fighter Command. And I mean, he was an absolutely committed spiritualist who was holding nightly seances to contact the spirits of the few who'd given their lives in, Spitfires and Hurricanes for England. And he was a dedicated spiritualist for his whole life. And he made no secret of it. Conan Doyle made no secret whatsoever of his spiritualism. There's a who's who of Victorian society who dabbled in spiritualism or had what we would now regard as alternative beliefs. The SPR got up to all manner of weird things. I mean, none of these people made any effort to hide it. And I think all that happens is that culturally we go through shifts, and those shifts are determined not by conspiracy often, but by marketing. So in the 1970s, Uri Geller was in, ESP was in. When I was growing up, the Bermuda Triangle was in. Do you remember that? Do you remember the 70s, or are you too young?
I remember Barry Manilow and Bermuda Triangle, and that was definitely in.
that was terrible.
I remember being born.
The 70s, in the 70s, any popular mainstream TV show might suddenly have a section on psychics or something about dowsers or Bigfoot, and it was all really popular, and people didn't laugh at you. And then the 1980s rolled round, and Ronald Reagan, and it all became, and suddenly AIDS happened, and sex was bad, and the whole hippie thing ended, and it was all about making money and being rich and having a great car and looking flash, and the whole yuppie thing happened, which is the antithesis of spiritual values. And during the 80s, anything of this type was completely, suppressed. It was pushed away totally. But then in the 90s, we had the X-Files, and we had a kind of new ufology. And for the early 90s, I thought ufology was really going places, because there were about 3 or 4 UFO magazines. Maybe it was just me, but I think there were UFO magazines all over the place. And suddenly the public seemed more sympathetic again. Then we got around to the 2000s, and Most Haunted came along. The UFO thing went away, and spiritualism, suddenly for the first time that I could remember, became big again. And I mean, Wicca and witchcraft had been big in the late 80s, early 90s. Then ufology in the mid-90s. Now it was the turn of spiritualism, and then the psychics, and they became really popular for about a decade. And now it all seems to have gone quiet again, and kids are up their own arses and more concerned with driving around in their Porsches and spending money and looking flash and grabbing your attention than they are spiritual stuff. But it seems to come and go. And I'm not convinced that it's really anything to do with a conspiracy. I think it's just our culture automatically rejects this stuff. And it's because it's frightening to most people.
Yeah, I think you're right. It definitely is like a cyclical thing, because because I organise kind of psychic fairs with my tuned in events thing, and when I first started doing the fairs, probably about mid 2000s ish, they were really quite popular. And before actually kind of doing them myself, I used to visit them, and that was probably year 1999 to the mid 2000s, and they were often ram packed. These days, I'm noticing very much a decline. I don't know if the market is oversaturated or people are too used to it, but it's kind of, it's hard to get bums on seats. It's hard to get people through the door sometimes, and I think that's the case for things like Most Haunted and Ghost Hunters. Do you think, CJ, some people might get too used to it? Aside from the kind of the fear factor, people are just kind of like, oh, it's just another psychic event, just another psychic TV show. And they kind of like get almost bored by it. Do you think?
In the 1980s, there wasn't a lot of it. I remember going to a psychic fair in Bury St Edmunds at the Athenaeum, and one of my friends fell down the staircase and injured his ankle, and I shouted out, "Please, please!" Because so many people rushed to heal him by crystals and laying on of hands, etc. I thought he might be crushed to death, but sorry, that was my cynical self back then. And I was singing, "Follow, follow, 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 follow the left-hand path" to the tune of "Follow the Yellow Brick Road" before I was thrown out. I was an obnoxious 18-year-old, wasn't I? After that, I've been to dozens of psychic fairs. I've wandered around, talked to people, had my photograph taken to show my aura, and spoken to people who do crystals and cards and all kinds of things. And they're great events. There's a lot of interest in them, but they're not really for me. I don't have the money. But yeah, they're declining in numbers, and I don't think it's because there's more. I think there's less now than there were a decade ago, aren't there?
Well, certainly in Hertfordshire, I've got quite a few rivals.
Oh, okay. Because
Yeah.
up here maybe you should move to Gloucestershire. Because up here we used to have them regularly up at the hotel and at the town hall and at the racecourse. And we had Aquarius 7 who ran events in Cheltenham up at there's a house, Lippiat House. And we had all manner of these kind of events, and it's all dried up. I mean, there would be an event like Neil's High Wycombe meet almost every night of the week. You could go to something new agey or a workshop or something. And nowadays, I'm not seeing any of that. It seems to be have been replaced by Slimming World, and which is really sad, isn't it?
That's probably the advent of the digital age, though. There's more stuff being on TV, more channels to watch, more computer games to play, and everyone's getting distracted, aren't they?
It's like, if you used to be into, I don't know, dressing up as a Boy Scout or smearing your girlfriend with jam or wearing jodhpurs and riding crops, whatever your personal fetish, it used to be pretty much impossible to meet anybody else who shared your own.
That's still popular, I'm sure.
You were going to die. You were going to die.
Where this is going, CJ.
But nowadays, with the wonders of the internet, no matter how weird your perversion, you will meet other people who think the same as you. And this is why we have such a fragmented paranormal community. Because even if I'm, nowadays, I could spend all night happily just talking to real experts about ghosts all over the world, and I wouldn't get any sleep if I tried. And I could watch thousands of hours of documentary, and I could listen to, the amount of information available is absolutely phenomenal. All of the journals that were written for 150 years in parapsychology are available on Lexion pretty much. So I could just sit there and read through the literature. So the internet has made it really hard to get people to come along to events and actually get involved. And it also means that it gets harder and harder to get involved, because if you don't see yourself as being an expert, then you're just put off by egotistical idiots who, pretend to be.
Yeah, yeah.
So the internet's changed the world. I think we all knew that, didn't we?
Oh, I'll tell you something, a real interesting direction in terms of kind of like realities clashing and kind of interdimensionality. Have you heard of the Mandela effect, CJ?
Oh, is that where you think that? Yeah, so Bob Smith dies, and you're convinced that Bob Smith has already died, and you look it up. Is it that?
Yeah, exactly that. It's such, I won't swear, but it's such a mind fill in the blank, a mind screw, let's say, that it's just absolutely bizarre. I mean, there's so many examples of this. For the listeners, if you don't know what the Mandela effect is, Google it and find out. But it's basically the idea that some people in South Africa were absolutely convinced that Nelson Mandela actually died in the 1980s in hospital, and then kind of obviously we in this reality became president of South Africa and then has since died. So that the reason it's called the Mandela effect is because of that, but it encompasses so many other weird reality glitches where you could absolutely swear blind something was a certain way, and then you go back and check and it's not. Now there's two kind of like directions of thinking. Either that you've misremembered it, or like mass consciousness has misremembered it, or some kind of reality glitch has crossed over and changed time, changed an aspect of time. For instance, if I was to say to you, when in Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, and the evil stepmother is looking into the mirror, and she says something something on the wall, who is the fairest of them all? What's the something something, CJ?
Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all?
Everyone thinks it's mirror, mirror. Apparently it's not. Apparently it's magic mirror.
magic mirror on the wall. I knew that because I read it last week in an article on the Mandela effect, and I've forgotten it again, which goes to show how much stronger my version is. But then again, what's another example? Elementary, my dear Watson, is never said by Holmes at any point. Really, in any of the Sherlock Holmes stories. He says it's elementary. And he does use the phrase "my dear Watson," but never together.
Never together. Now this one's been really bugging me. This one made me want to scream. Okay, so Neil and CJ, do you remember around about the late 80s, early 90s, around about that time, Walker's Crisps, which is a brand in England, and for American listeners, it's probably Lay's, I think they call it, or maybe it's Australia, it's Lay's. But here we have Walker's. Now, in my memory, they used to have blue for salt and vinegar, and to me blue was like the sea salty, and they used to have green packets for cheese and onion, and to me onions were like kind of like spring onions, the stalks of them were green. That's kind of like how I remembered it. Now, do you remember them switching the colours for those flavors?
No, I don't think they did. I think what happened was my brother at that time was one of the people running Smith's Crisps marketing department.
Right.
And Smith's Crisps colours were blue for salt and vinegar and green for cheese and onion. And in the 1970s and 80s, Smith's Crisps were by far the largest producer of crisps in the UK.
Yeah.
But they were overtaken in the early 90s by Walker's, who became the mainstream. Walker's, after my brother left, actually, Walker's took over. And Walker's took over the high street, and Walker's used different colours. They use blue for cheese and onion and green for salt and vinegar. So I think what's happening is that you're remembering that your favourite crisps when you were a child had those colours, and then they switched. But actually, there was a brand switch. And you failed to remember the brand.
Right.
But it's only the fact that I happen to have a brother who works...
How odd is that, eh?
That is
in marketing crisps. I'm still aware of this fact.
That's interesting. Well, that could explain some of the kind of the Mandela effects, because that does make sense, actually. So it's like a portion of my brain completely missed out the Smiths bit, and all it remembered was kind of like the switching of the colours bit.
There is also the Mandela effect with about C-3PO's leg, isn't there?
Oh, yes.
The silver leg that no one fails to remember in the Star Wars film.
That's it, yes. C-3PO apparently has always had a silver left leg or arm. It was either an arm or a leg. And yet everyone's memory is a completely all gold, all brass.
He claims a PIP payment for it, I gather.
That's a disability payment for those in America. Right, okay, so at the end of the day then, these things could just be a psychological artifact, couldn't they?
You're going a bit distant, Christian. Come a bit closer to the mic.
That was me putting my head next to the mic, so obviously when I put my head by the mic, it doesn't work.
That's the Christian effect.
That's the Christian effect.
Well, okay, so Halloween's upon us. What are you guys doing for Halloween then?
Well, me personally, because I run psychic events, I'm literally got an event every single night from now until 31st of October. So I'm going to be flat out and then kind of like relaxing after that. What about you, Neil?
Probably nothing. I'm too busy recording radio shows for everybody. But I don't know, really. I haven't really planned it. I mean, we do have the High Wycombe Paranormal Meetup group coming up soon, which has got David Caton. He's going to be talking about animal mutilations, which is an interesting phenomenon, and one not to be taken lightly, because he's got lots of slides of animals that are mutilated, and most people sort of think that they're some crazy people sort of doing devil worshipping, go around hacking heads off sheep or something like that, but it's actually a lot deeper than that. And the skeptics say it's foxes eating large cows, which I find hard to believe. So we've got that running next week, in fact, at the High Wycombe Paranormal Group on the 25th. So it's coming up close to Halloween. It's kind of Halloweenish sort of subject. What about you, Christian?
I was meant to be doing a ghost walk up in Newmarket in Suffolk, but apparently they've rebranded this year and decided to concentrate on their Christmas events, so they don't want me. Oh. So I'm not doing anything this year at all, which actually, as I said earlier, my girlfriend has a PhD in apparitions, and she's not doing anything either. And ever since she first got her PhD about 4 or 5 years ago, you'd have thought by now somebody from the media would have come along and said, "Hello, you're an expert on ghosts. Would you like to talk to us?" But nobody ever does. Never, no interest whatsoever.
Well,
So
I'll tell you what, Christian, keep an eye on Facebook because I'm bombarded with spooky Halloween type events, which of course I can't make because I'm doing my own events. But there's so many walks, so many guided tours, so many kind of like Halloweeny type things going on. Yeah, keep an eye on Facebook.
I guess the problem is that I'm just profoundly dull. So I'm an academic and therefore not very interesting. That's probably the problem, isn't it?
Well, one thing that intrigues me, I remember when you came and did your talk, which was very, very popular, I might add, for us at the High Wycombe Paranormal Meetup group. Someone mentioned the fact of ghosts having a shelf life. Now, can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah. The idea is that, well, firstly, how many Roman ghosts get seen?
Well, there was that case of the guy in the I think it was in York. He was in an apprentice plumber or something, wasn't he? In the 60s, I think it was.
Electrician. Harry
Straight.
Martindale,
Yeah,
1950s. Yeah, he died last year or the year before, but yeah, he was in the basement of the treasurer's house, and he said he saw a Roman legion march through.
that's it.
And there's the Roman centurion of Mersey Island down near London, and then there was which was it? I can't remember which of the archaeologists. One of the archaeologists on Cranbourne Chase in the 30s who said they saw a Bronze Age horseman. But generally speaking, most apparitions don't appear to be very ancient. They seem to date from the last few hundred years. In fact, in the Victorian era, most of them appear to have been almost contemporaneous in the SPR records. They were of people who'd only recently died on the majority. And that still is the case today. The majority of apparitions that were reported to us are of people who've passed relatively recently, within the last 10 years or so. Is that your experience, or?
I would
Yeah, go on, Andy.
Yes, I'd say absolutely 100%. And I would say from the reports that I've seen is that the strongest apparitions in terms of communication or moving objects or poltergeist type stuff tends to be the most modern ones. And the things like the Roman Legion ones tend to be the most kind of faded and with less energy. What do you think, Neil?
Well, they're cheap repeats. There's I mean, you don't actually see dinosaur ghosts for a start, do you? Down the high street, very, very few of those. Maybe apart from Barney the dinosaur, I don't know. But
What about the Loch Ness monster?
yeah, but that's actually, a lot of people claim it's actually a physical thing. I mean, there has been sightings of pterodactyls out in where is it now? North of Australia. I forget the place. It's
Papua New Guinea.
Yeah,
Also,
yeah.
all over America. There's a review on my blog, which is called "And Sometimes He's So Nameless." My blog has a review of a book on living dinosaurs in America, living pterodactyls in America, by a cryptozoologist called Jonathan Whitcomb, and it's a fascinating subject. It's a great book. You should read it.
Well, I did actually talk to a guy who is an airline pilot, not an airline pilot, a normal pilot, small plane. And
Yep.
he knew a guy that was a complete skeptic, and he had to do this run from Australia to Papua New Guinea, maybe a couple of times a week or maybe a couple of times a month. I don't know the duration. And he was flying there with his co-pilot and a passenger, and they were getting over towards Papua New Guinea, one of the remote islands of the area. It was just getting towards dusk, I believe, and they saw another plane coming towards them, and they thought, that's a bit odd. That plane hasn't got any navigation lights. They were flying about 4,000 feet, which is typical for that type of plane. And as they got closer and closer to it, they thought, it's going to hit us. And so they took evasive manoeuvres and just dodged out of the way. But as they looked at it, one of the guys said, we're not in Jurassic Park, are we? Because they all kind of looked and said, that's a bloody pterodactyl type of thing, And they said they would have never have believed it had someone told them that story. But the fact is that they saw it themselves, convinced them, and the three witnesses to it, they thought, my God, what's going on here? So I actually looked into it a little bit more and found there's quite a few sightings in Papua New Guinea of these pterodactyls with glowing stomachs, I believe. So it might give rise to the legends of dragons, perhaps.
The Ropen. Whitcomb argues that the reason that they glow is that they're phosphorescent, and that they produce a kind of phosphorescence and internal lighting that attracts insects. The reason they attract insects is they feed on bats. So the bats follow the insects, and the pterodactyls eat the bats. I don't know how batty that is, but that's his argument in his book, and it does seem to be internally consistent. I mean, to be fair, if you saw a pterodactyl, you're hardly likely to make up that it glows in the dark, are you? but people all over the country, all over America, and indeed all over the world. I even found an example in England in one book of somebody who claimed to have seen a pterodactyl over England, and that really does. I have a fairly high boggle factor, but when people tell me they've seen like pterodactyls in Surrey, then I must admit my jaw drops and hits the floor.
Maybe it was Chessington World's Adventures or something, you know.
Well, I did wonder if somebody was building remote-controlled pterodactyls, because it has been done.
I mean, they make that. I mean, I actually think back to those films of the '70s with Doug McClure and Peter Cushing, the rubber monsters of the Land That Time Forgot, and I do think they had a few pterodactyl type creatures in one or two of those films, like Journey, not the Journey, the one where they drilled into the earth, the land underneath the earth, or something like
Journey to the Centre of the Earth?
Yeah, or At the Earth's Core, I think it was, that one. They're kind of pterodactyl. So they did build a lot of rubber suits for that kind of era, for those kind of films. So, a skeptic would say, oh, well, that's obviously, they saw one of those suits being made, or someone made one and sold it to someone in that area or something, That's a possibility. You can't rule it out. But when you start seeing in remote places like, Papua New Guinea, and there's repeated reports, and you're getting reports from people who are total skeptics, then you have to start to sit up and do take notice and think, well, this is definitely something to be looked into.
Andrew, just thinking about this, have you ever come across anything that's so far out that you've actually doubted it could be true?
Yeah, my early experiences.
Really?
Yeah. So, how I started out is that the very first memory I have of anything weird happening was being in my cot, and I heard this very kind of like deep male voice saying, "Hello, what's your name?" And I've told this story quite a few times, but I'll say it again. And it turns out that I think that might have been my spirit guide, kind of like working out if I was ready to work. But that's not actually the weird bit. The weird bit that I used to put in the back of my mind and think, well, that can't possibly be the case, was I remember experiences of being in my bed and what I felt was being floated through glass whilst on my back looking upwards, and then going outside and looking up at the night sky with the stars and kind of feeling the wind against my skin, going into the kind of like the car park which was next to my house. So this is when I was aged around about 2, 3, 4. And I remember these kind of like little troll-like beings. If you imagine the Jawas from Star Wars, like these brown cloaked hooded little beings that reminded me of trolls. And just kind of like, I didn't have any memory from then on of what the experience was about. But the reason I put it to the back of my mind as it's got to be impossible is the whole going through the glass bit, the whole kind of floating through the glass, because to me that's physically impossible, surely. And then in the last few years, the last 10 or 15 years, I would get into kind of UFO stories, abduction stories, and experiences from other people. And they explain about being floated through glass and floated through walls. And then I'm thinking, So, yeah. Make of that what you will.
Sounds like very abduction type experiences to me.
Exactly. So it was at the back of my mind, because to me, rationally and scientifically, it's got to be impossible. You can't float a person through glass. And yet I would come across story after story of people where they explain exactly that these ETs or whatever it is that's kind of like doing this are manipulating reality, physical reality, to bring bodies through walls and glass, it's just so far out. I don't even know where to go with that.
I believe that's also similar, because in the same way that in the Skull experiment they were manipulating reality or matter so that they could put like messages on the film, passing things solidly through hands, like crystals were being passed through the scientists' and researchers' hands and things. 1 minute they're touching something solid, then they said touch it again, and their fingers tried to grasp something that wasn't there, yet they could all physically see it. It's like the ETs and spirit guides or whatever know what they're dealing with. They're dealing with the same phenomena, the same physics, if you like, of this bizarre reality, and it's showing that the reality we understand is not quite easy, the Einstein kind of worldview, which a lot of people are now starting to doubt whether they actually got it right at all.
CJ, are you still there?
Yeah. I was listening.
Okay. Come a bit closer again because you've gone distant
Sorry,
again.
yeah.
Okay, so this is an interesting question. Would I be right in saying, because you've got a psychological background, would I be right in saying that most people, when they're dreaming in a dream, the dream doesn't have temperature and it doesn't have things like wind, like feeling wind against your skin? Would I be right in that assumption?
I don't know is the honest answer, because dreams are incredibly complicated, and I know there's something about you can't switch a light bulb on in a dream,
Yeah,
and I don't know why,
yeah,
but I actually don't know why that is the case or anything about it. When
yeah,
I don't know something, one of the things you'll find about me as an academic is that I immediately admit to not knowing it.
yeah.
So yeah, sorry, I can't. But it doesn't sound like a dream, does it? But I don't know enough about the out of the body experience, and I don't know enough about dreaming to be able to answer your question. I'm sorry, I really am.
That's okay. It was very, very lucid, and you're right. It didn't feel like a dream, and you're right about the switching off the light bulb. Apparently, there's two things that you're not aware of in terms of dreams, or you can't do. Number one, the light bulb thing, and number two, apparently you're not aware of your nose. So if you're kind of like having a
Oh,
dream.
okay,
Yeah, this is a
that's
strange one,
interesting.
really. So at the moment now, you're looking out, but you're aware that your nose is there. In a dream, you don't get that, apparently. Now, I don't remember the nose thing at all in my kind of like my strange experience, but I do remember the odd things within that experience was the wind against my face
Yep.
and the temperature, the coldness of the night air. Now, I've never had that in a dream, so to speak. So,
I
don't
can't
know.
I can't think of any time that I've experienced heat or cold in a dream either. But
Mm.
then again, I forget all my dreams so quickly. For years, I tried to keep a dream notepad to try and see. I'd read Dunn's Experiment with Time. Are you familiar with the book?
I'm not, no.
No, carry on.
Okay, he was an aircraft engineer. He was in the British Army in the 1880s, and he had a dream one night about a volcano blowing up and 30,000 people dying, or was it 300,000 people, I think. But anyway, whatever the dream, he got it wrong by a factor of 10, because Martinique, in a Pacific island, I believe, there was a massive explosion and loads of people died. And it was exactly when the newspapers arrived a couple of days later, it was exactly what his dream had been. So thereafter, he became convinced that dreams gave us a glimpse into a parallel timeline. And when he wasn't designing planes for the RAF and the MOD, he spent his time researching the nature of dreams and the nature of time. And his book, An Experiment with Time, is a classic, but a difficult to read classic, because he's an engineer. And the book, it takes on the form of a kind of engineering manual in places. It's dull, technical, and rather convoluted with lots of diagrams. So, but I tried recording my dreams in the notepad, and I mean the problem is that I'm not psychic. I'm not sensitive in any way. I'm much better at recording other people's experiences and trying to understand them than I am at having my own. But I did at least attempt it, and it really is an experiment that I would encourage everyone to try. There's also, of course. Yeah, sorry.
I was going to say the interesting thing about dreams that I've heard of. I met a guy years ago who did a talk about dream research, and he said that as well as the light bulb one, which you mentioned, is that if you read in, say, a newspaper in a dream, you'll find that it doesn't make any kind of sense. One way they say of testing if you're in a dream or not, like for lucid dreamers, people trying to practice, is that if they find themselves in a dream reading a book or a newspaper or some sort of script of some sort, is to look away and then look back again, and you'll find the words have changed. They're not kind of, there's no continuity sort of thing, which is an interesting thing. So they say the ways of getting into dreams is to do various kind of like remembrance things. Like, for instance, you might have a book in real life, look at it, see the title, look away, and then look back to the book again and check the titles there. And you make that a habit. And so that when you're in a dream, you'll have that habit that carries over into the dream self. And so in your dream, you'll have the book in front of you, you look at the title, then you look away, and bang, you look back at the book and the title was changed or something. And that's what then wakes you up to become a lucid dreamer. That's what I've heard. It's very difficult, though, to even remember to do that instruction.
I'll tell you what, actually, we've got less than 10 minutes left, haven't we?
That's correct, yeah.
So how about, as it's Halloween, we tell people how to see a ghost at home?
Brilliant idea. Does it involve
I like
rice
it. Let's
pudding
do it.
or anything like that? Or
What is it with your fetish for rice puddings? Do you dress up in Wellingtons and
I,
bathe in it, or?
I think I've heard that Neil has baths sometimes with gallons of rice pudding, and he just rolls around in it.
I heard it was him, 6 women, and the rice pudding. Is that correct? Or
and fridge magnets.
And fridge magnets
and the goat and the goat. Okay. So you want to see a ghost at home? This is what you're going to need. You're going to need to go down to your local IKEA or B&Q or Walmart or similar, unless you've got one. You'll need a normal wall mirror, a standard mirror. Go for one about 6 foot high, standard kind of household mirror. If you've got a large mirror that will, already in the house, that's fine. Just take it. Secondly, you'll need to find part of your house that's, narrow, like a corridor or a small section that you can curtain off and which you can black out because you're going to be sitting in the dark staring at a mirror. Next thing you need to do is to position the mirror up against the wall, and then you can build a little booth, a little curtain around yourself to give you, in fact, just sit inside a cupboard would do. Can you imagine what I'm describing?
Seance cupboard sort of thing?
Coffin?
Yeah. Well, no, it's a bit bigger than a coffin, but yeah, you want to be about 3 feet away from the mirror on a chair facing towards the mirror on the wall. And what you want to do is you want to put a sheet behind you, and then you want a small light, a blue light's ideal if you can get one behind your head, or you could put a candle in front of you if you have to, but I would be very careful with candles for obvious reasons around, in a small confined space. And what you're going to do is you're going to sit for 25 minutes, maybe 30 minutes, call it 30 minutes, and you're going to quietly just breathe slowly, and you're going to think about nothing in particular. Just watch the mirror and wait for the spirits to emerge. And this is an ancient technique for communicating with the dead called the psychomantium that was used by the Greeks and Romans. And they used to build underground chambers, some of which still exist and which still have these black obsidian mirrors or black, polished silver mirrors in them. And parapsychologists discovered in the late 70s that when they were working with bereaved people, that if you take them into one of these chambers, they would see spirits who would emerge and actually physically interact with them, hug them or talk to them, and that they would have very real experiences after 20 to 30 minutes. Some people just see their face changing colours and just have strange, trippy type experiences. Some people have profoundly moving encounters with apparitions. Now, you might say, well, it's just a trick, isn't it? It's just the mirror distorting your perceptions. But if it is a trick, it's a very real experience, and it's in some level it's meaningful. So I don't know. I don't know what it means. I don't know what it does. But if you want to see a ghost, set up a mirror, sit in a dark room, 3 feet from the mirror, place a light behind yourself. Nothing more complicated is required, and wait for your ghost to appear.
Has it worked for you?
Actually, yeah, sort of. I tried doing it. Unfortunately, we were trying to get a lot of people through, and what I had was really weird visual disturbances, and then I freaked out. Because I'm a coward, I ran away and went outside. When we set up a proper psychomantium and ran experiments with other people, however, one of them had a very moving experience of talking to someone who'd passed, and several others saw figures looking back at them, and one had a really disturbing. They said it was just the old experience of looking at their face, and their face aged till they were about 80 years old, and they were looking at themselves, but they were dressed differently. It's clearly a way of inducing some kind of hallucination, some kind of auto-hypnosis, and I take no responsibility whatsoever for whatever happens to you if you try it.
And neither do we. Just want to point out the Paranormal Peep show has no responsibility whatsoever. Any advice taken by CJ is at people's entire risk themselves. Just want to point that out.
He does run a mirror company as well.
I do run a mirror. No, I do not run a mirror company. Seriously, it's such a simple experiment. And there's a book which is called, what is it called? Is it called Visions? Hang on, I'll see. Here on the bookshelf somewhere, there is the book that was written by a famous American parapsychologist where he describes the experience. And I can't find it now. Isn't that always the way? When you really need something, you can't find it. But anyway, thank you so much for inviting me. It's such a simple method. And I thought before we disappeared today, it was worth discussing that.
A brilliant idea. So, maybe the next stage on from that, if you do get success with seeing people in the mirror, is to maybe have a video camera on a tripod pointing at the mirror, standing by yourself, so you can video it for independent verification.
the Americans did some experiments and they found that the temperature actually dropped. They built a Faraday cage, and they found that there was peculiar spikes in microwave radiation. They said, I think it was Horan and Langer actually who did it, but I'm not sure without my books to hand. But the people who did it said that they got anomalous readings in temperature and in microwave frequencies at the time when the exact moments when people were witnessing the apparitions, but not at other points. And there was another peculiarity. If you're sitting in a small box, which is what the full version would be, it's like, you're sitting in a small room with electronic equipment monitoring, you would expect the ambient temperature to go up constantly because, there's heat being released into the room and your body heat's going into the room. But actually, when the apparition appeared, the temperature dropped.
That's very consistent with ghosts.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, maybe. Actually, my girlfriend's PhD, she discovered that although everybody knows that the temperature drops when ghosts appeared, that isn't actually a feature of most people's ghost stories. It was in less than 2% of cases, and when she tests it, it's not statistically significant. So, it's like walking through walls. It doesn't happen half as much as you would imagine from what people's, fictional stories suggest. She studied a huge number of ghost experiences over the years, but she studied in depth 250, I think it was, experiences, and broke them down and looked at what actually happened for her PhD. And she found that consistently from 1882 to the modern day, 1888 to the modern day, the experience, every time anybody does the research she did, the experiences are pretty much exactly the same. They don't change with time. So it suggests that there's a real thing going on, not something cultural. But yeah, get a mirror, try it for Halloween, ask your friends around, build a booth, put the mirror up, and then, isn't it in the tradition of American spooky games of staring into mirrors at Halloween?
Yeah. Now, you could try this maybe with a torch instead of a candle for safety reasons.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking you could either get one of those small LED candles. Have you seen them? They're like little.
They simulate very well the candle effect, don't they?
They give the same flickery effect without actually, and they change colour as well, which would be cool. Because coloured light, I think, is always slightly better. Or the other option, you can just use a torch, or indeed just a lamp, or anything at all. But just take a small dark room, you just sit in your bedroom. But the point is you have to sit still, put your hands on your thighs, sit up straight, stare at the mirror, set an alarm for 30 minutes.
Are you allowed to blink?
Oh, yeah, of course you are.
Well, you've got to blink. You can't.
If you don't blink, what's going to
blink and you miss it, yeah.
Yeah.
Blinking
I would also add, from my perspective, I would advise people to do a positive affirmation beforehand to only have contact with beings of love, of those with a positive outlook who are of a loving light agenda, which would hopefully kind of block out the dark ones.
It was Dr. Raymond Moody who wrote the book. He wrote Life After Life, or whatever it was called, one of the earliest books on the near-death experience.
Yeah, I know it.
And Dr. Raymond Moody went on to write a book, I think it's called something like Encounters or Vision. I think it's called just Encounters, actually. I can't find my copy now. It's typical, isn't it? But it is absolutely fascinating. And I have no idea why people haven't done much more work on it. And again, it seems to be this mainstream resistance to anything, like this. Maybe it just frightens people. I don't know.
Okay, well, we've drawn very much to the end of our show for this evening, our Halloween special. So I'll just have to say thank you very much indeed to Christian Jensen Roma, who has taken the time out to speak to us on this Halloween special. And thank you very much, Andy, for taking part as well. Any sort of thing that you're planning, special talks or any events you might be taking part in, Christian, before you go?
I'm the secretary of ASAP, which is the Association for Scientific Study of Anomalous Phenomena. So you can read about ASAP, whose opinions are not mine, because we don't, have corporate opinions, which it's just a collection of individuals, at www.asap.ac.uk. And we always have events going on there. So ASAP, ASSAP. Have a look it up, Google us, and it'd be lovely to hear from you. And if you've enjoyed the talk, feel free to email me. Thank you.
Brilliant.
Well, thanks for coming along, CJ. And once again, I'll mention that I'm very busy myself with tuned in events. So if anyone is listening here in the southeast of England, go onto Facebook and look at Tuned with a D, Tuned In Events. And we're doing loads of psychic events right from now up until Halloween, including a few kind of mini demos and workshops and things like that. So have a look at that and join our group. Over to you, Neil.
Okay, thank you very much indeed for everyone taking part, and we wish everybody a happy Halloween. And just to say that you can catch all our shows on the Paranormal UK Radio Network, on Stitcher, iTunes, Podbean, and any other kind of repeat stations that you get out there, hopefully. So well, join us again for another exciting delve or dip into the paranormal, or even a peep into the paranormal. From Andy and myself and Christian, it's good night.
Good night.
Night.